Tonight's Scoreboard, Andrew Breitbart answering the challenge. Is there racism inside the NAACP? With a controversial video leading to the resignation of a USDA official.
So many black people have lost their farmland, and here I was faced with that from a white person.
But now critics are screaming. The full video tells a different story. And tonight, Breitbart has more on this story in his latest shot, heard by the White House. A Utah senator with a superhero complex takes a shot at federal power. State Senator Howard Stevenson scoring his business-backed alternative to Arizona-style immigration reform. Who's up, who's down, and where there's a will, there's a way. One of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time, helping push back the wall of red tape threatening the American dream. America's Nightly Scoreboard starts right now. Hi, everybody. I'm David Asman. Thanks for joining us. Kicking off tonight, the triumph of Andrew Breitbart over the establishment. Now, as we woke this morning, seemed pretty much like a clean sweep for our friend Andrew. USDA official Shirley Sherrod resigned because Breitbart posted a video of her admitting that racial prejudice affected her decisions in helping out farmers in Georgia. Now, here's the clip of Ms. Sherrod speaking in front of the NAACP in March of this year.
I was struggling with the fact that so many black people have lost their farmland, and here I was faced with having to have a white person save their land. So I didn't give him the full force of what I could do.
Now, just as background, the NAACP had spent about a couple of weeks ranting about racism among Tea Partiers based on scant evidence and fabricated examples. Furthermore, they claimed they would never tolerate prejudice in their own organization. Now, Breitbart took that as a challenge, found the Sherrod tape in just a few days and put it up on his biggovernment.com website. Ms. Sherrod resigned a day later, though now she claims she was pushed out unwillingly by a panicky White House. And beyond the obvious points about hypocrisy and reverse racism, what her tape suggests to us is how inept and ultimately ill-equipped government bureaucrats are at making business decisions, whether dealing with farms or anything else. Now, business decisions made by bureaucrats are always loaded with prejudice and political considerations, when they should be based on the only consideration that matters: will this decision pay off? Now, whenever you have government bureaucrats determining creditworthiness or any other business priority, personal prejudice will get in the way. That's the story that sticks out to us about Ms. Sherrod, and the TARP bailouts are just another example of this. It's clear now that TARP loans were influenced by political considerations and cronyism. One United Bank, for example, got TARP money, even though it was a terribly run bank that never should have qualified. But Congresswoman Maxine Waters' husband was on the board of One United, and Barney Frank was a friend, so the bank got millions. Shore Bank in Illinois is another badly run bank that owes its bailout to the same kind of favoritism. Now, the point that Ms. Sherrod made very clear in that tape is that bureaucrats do have a lot of trouble separating personal and political differences from business decisions. Now, that not only gives rise to more prejudice, it interferes with the bottom line. Big government does business very badly, as our terrible jobs numbers prove only too well. The Sherrod case points to many things, but for our money, the most important thing is that big government needs to get out of business altogether. So why did the White House pull the trigger so quickly based on what Andrew Breitbart posted? Are the Democrats panicking? Here to score it for us are Mark Sawyer, he's political science professor at UCLA, and Fox News contributor Monica Crowley. Well, Monica, this story has been changing by the minute all day today. And at first, a woman who seemed to allow prejudice to affect her decisions turns out to have a pretty fair story to tell about the way she was pretty upfront about how it did at one point affect her decisions, but eventually she changed her ways.
Right, and she was making the argument to the White House, look, I was telling a story about something that happened to me 24 years ago, where my own personal prejudices came into play with this white farmer. But she was using it as an illustrative point, saying that was a pivot point in my life, when then I changed my whole attitude. I changed those biases, and I became a lot more fair as a person.
Okay, so
not
Mark,
judging somebody by the color
I want to
of their
go
skin.
bing, 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 bing here in terms of getting an analysis of what happened. So why then did the White House pull the trigger on her so quickly?
Well, the far right has spent all summer dog whistling racism and getting
No, wait
this
a minute,
whole
wait a minute. You're
dialogue
saying
into
that the
feeling-
far right is now responsible for making executive decisions in the White House?
Well, no, the
That's
White House
exactly
is
what you said.
responding
My
to the
question
racial
is,
dog
why
whistle.
did the White House pull the trigger so quickly? And you said it's because of the right wing. Are they now taking all their
Yes.
cues from the right wing?
No, but they've been worried about this. Look, any week that we spend talking about race is a bad week for the White House, and it feeds into the kind of racial paranoia that's being spread amongst a lot of white voters that the administration is trying to harm the economy or harm them or pass health care out of some kind of
Well,
racial
hold on.
vendetta.
That's not a
And that
racial
dog whistle
thing. That's
has
an
been out there.
ideological thing, Mark. The point is, let's stick on case here. Otherwise, we're going to get into all other kind of areas we'll disagree on. What about the case of what happened to Ms. Sherrod? Did the White House pull the trigger too quickly, and why? You're not really suggesting that they take all their cues from the right wing now, are you?
They don't take all their cues, but I think they're really concerned about. Look, this was the latest man bites dog story. Like, you guys have been running the new Black Panther Party story and a range of other stories that feed into white racial fears and paranoia.
Yeah, but
So
they
seeing
didn't
that
pull
little
their
clip
they
and that
didn't pull
statement
their
by the
they didn't
woman-
change their decision at the Justice Department based on anything that Fox News or anybody else said.
No, and the Justice Department is an independent agency, and I think also the one question that remains apart is that any of this woman's subsequent decisions could be reviewed to ask, well, did she act out of prejudice then, given even this sort of out of context part on this tape? So I think the White House actually acted correctly.
Monica,
though. It's a really unfortunate situation because she was speaking
it is an
honestly
unfortunate
about
situation.
her
But Monica,
experience.
again, Mark's only answer when I said why did they pull the trigger so quickly, and we all agree that they did pull it too quickly, is because they're right wing. Do you really believe that they are that sensitive to what the right wing is saying?
I guess they're really afraid of Fox News, Fox Business, and the Tea Party. Victory! Look,
But no,
this racial dog
Don't you think there's something else going on here?
There is
Hold on, Mark. Hold on, Mark. You had your say. Go ahead.
Ms. Sherrod on another network earlier today said, yes, this White House is running scared of the Tea Party and of Fox News.
I mean, that
don't know
shows an
whether that's
extraordinary
legitimate or not.
panic.
Look,
Hold on a second. We've talked about this panic before. We talked about it last week. We talked about it before. Alan Combs, your brother-in-law, denied that the White House and the Democrats have it. But this shows that kind of panicky behavior.
And here's where the White House is really screwed up. In the Van Jones case, Van Jones was a self-avowed communist who was making comments up until the very day that he resigned that were incredibly radical, progressive, redistribution of wealth, and so on. He needed to go. The White House was not going to defend him. In this case, this woman has an actual, real, legitimate story about a turning point in her character. They could have used that as a learning lesson going forward, a real teachable moment, and they blew it because they panicked.
Well, and there are still some parts of this story that we don't have an answer for. Hopefully, Breitbart will be able to fill us in. He's going to be joining us later in the show. Mark, why didn't we have the full tape instead of just that partial tape? We still don't know the answer to that, right?
Well, the full tape doesn't fit the narrative that there's a black conspiracy against white people that starts at the White House.
The question is, though, whether the edited tape was actually edited by the NAACP.
The tape was actually edited by the...
We don't know. That's the point. I mean, there are a lot of details we need to fill in here as to where
So
Andrew got the
NAACP
tape
wants
and
to
what
portray
shape it was in when he got it.
themselves as racist. So the NAACP would want to portray themselves as
Who
racist.
knows?
No, I mean, I think this is a really deep problem, and I think we need to have a much more honest dialogue about race and racism.
Well,
and
and
stuff
again,
like the new Black Panther Party is not useful.
We have to wrap, and because we have a lot going on in this show. But I just got to ask about my initial point that this shows a lot about how bureaucrats should not be involved in business
absolutely.
decisions.
And this conversation should be led by the guy in the White House, the first black president, the This is one thing that a black president can do that a white president cannot. And where is Obama? He is AWOL.
Guys, we got to leave it at that. Mark Sawyer, Monica Crowley, thank you very much. Stick around, by the way. You will hear